Hey, what's up guys? It is METAGAMESGX here, and we are going to be checking out the top 10 budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks for this format. Basically, the context is Justice Hunters just released, so we have now Yummy, Draco Tail, and Canine VS to contend with in the meta, and there are a bunch of new decks in this list that you guys can make for under $150. Most of these decks averaging about $100, and you know, these will be decks that are meta ready, tournament winning, and you can take these lists and expect to do decently well. So if you guys want to see this again next month, make sure this video gets to 150 likes, and if we do, we'll do a follow-up in September. And yeah guys, so let's get right into it. So for the first deck, we have something new. We have RB Earth Machine. Now, Earth Machine is a pretty classic deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! You use the Machina cards in order to do really crazy extension plays to end on a board full of negates like Cyber Dragon Infinity and Regulus. So this version incorporates the new TCG exclusive archetype, the RBs, aka robots, or robobots, whatever it is. So it's really cool. I think that these cards add a lot of actually teeth to the end board. It has a bunch of ability to layer the end board with pops and other interactions, but also on top of that, they're decent board breakers in the sense that they command a response. So I think that these cards can really catch people off guard if you aren't like really prepared for them, and a lot of people won't really know what the RB cards do. And as you guys can see in this build, you can still run pretty decent amount of non-engine, about 10-11 non-engine, and broken cards like Clockwork Knight really do make this deck a unique kind of machine pile that allows you to actually compete in this current metagame. This was a top 4 Halifax regional list. Next we have this top 4 UK Open Purrely. Now I took this out of the archives because I think this format Purrely is actually a pretty decent option because you don't trigger the canine cards, and then also you can run board breakers, and famously this format, board breakers are basically not that great. Now, this list obviously has the 3 triple tactics talents. At that point, you'll just have to put in 2 thrust, right? No big deal, right? So I think that board breakers are great into the Yummy, the VS Canine deck, and then also Draco Tail. So I think that having a deck that can already main a bunch of board breakers pretty easily and go along with the engine pretty well is pretty nice. Plus, because you have board breaking capability in your deck, from like Zeus plays, and then also just quick OTKs through the Purrely happiness. And this deck already running Dark Ruler no more, it's as if they were ready for the K9 VS meta. This thing one-shots the Yummy board. So I think Purrely is actually a really underrated pick for this format if you're looking for something budget at like about $100. So check out Purrely, and plus we're probably gonna get new Purrely support in the next year or two, so deck sets up an unaffected Noir that if you get to go first and set this up, you basically win the game. Next we have Bystial Regenesis, and we actually have this deck profile on my channel. Go check it out down below. And this is the most expensive deck on the list, but I want to include it because it's starting to get down there in price, and I think that Bystial Regenesis is very, very solid. Like, you could just, take out the 2 Lubellions, and then this list goes down below $150. So I think that this list can run a bunch of non-engine, and the Regenesis cards are absolutely broken if they get going. The engine has its own in-engine Omni Negate in the form of Regenesis Sage, but then also Regenesis Warrior and Regenesis Dragon providing great just end board pieces, and then Regenesis Archfiend being its best extender / 1-card combo. But sometimes it can be a little bit slow to start, but that's why you run the Bystials. It gets to synergize off of monsters with 2500 attack or defense. So if you're playing against a deck like that, like Branded, which Branded Draco Tail is pretty kind of popular, right? Or just any Bystials, this deck can kind of just really go off really hard because of that. The end board is quite competent, and it can board break decently well because of its ability to put big bodies that just demand a response. And your extra deck is basically, anything you want it to be, so you can fit things like Nadir Servant or just other things that, you necessarily wouldn't be able to, like, elsewise, like Super Poly. And this list has a cool tech in Dragon's Mind here, which is a solemn judgment for basically any deck with 2500 attack or defense monsters, so it's perfect tech for this kind of thing. Next, we have this top 8 Hilo WCQ Ice Barrier Atlantean Mermail list, and I think we featured this last month, but I think that Mermail is still a solid contender. We just saw it get top 64 at the NAWCQ, and this variant just chooses to run a bit more of a heavy water pile kind of variant, where you're just running, you know, some water or ice barrier statue combos that you can set up a really unbreakable onboard between the Ryo and then the barrier statue. And you have great board breaking capability in the form of Poseidra the Storming Atlantean, which personally I'd run 3 of. This card's absolutely broken, but I feel like you can definitely tech this deck to how you want to, and you get access to the best water cards in the game in the form of Trishula. And this deck can go into the Lancia, which is quite powerful too, so you can actually just cheat out the Trishula that way. And you have board breaking through things like Zealantis and, of course, the Poseidra Abyss, which is just absolutely broken. Going first and going second, this deck is very competent. I think it's something that if you want something that really, if you learn how to play the optimal combos, it will really reward you and then give you a great all-around matchup spread. Next, we have this top 32 Dogmatika Stun list from the Central America WCQ. There's actually been a few Dogmatika Stun lists recently, so I think this deck is kind of back on the rise a little bit, which is kind of neat. And, you know, this might just be the best stun variant at the moment. Since Fossil Dyne is still at 3, you can run that, and plus this deck chose to run one of each of the best barrier statues, I guess. And then you basically just set up like one of these floodgate monsters, plus just like a lot of backup with all the back row, and you have board breakers in terms of super poly, so you just kind of play protect the castle and until you just beat down your opponent to death, essentially. So it's a very good deck that when it goes first, and you know, you can get lucky going second too. And obviously this deck got to a top 32 finish at the, you know, one of the biggest WCQs, so I think it's a very solid list, and you know, has had multiple tops, and the deck only runs $100, so it's very cheap in that regard. And there's lots of deck building behind it. Obviously it's not the most exciting or really fun to play deck, but I think it's very solid if you want something that can just be very anti-meta. Next we have Memento, which I still feel like is a very solid option, all things considered, since before in the last format it had actually quite a few YCS wins on top of having you know, just a solid matchup spread into a lot of different decks, and providing and putting up a really good onboard, and you know, a decent ability to go second through its ability to main deck like things like Super Poly, and then Memento Fusion acting like a board breaker, and having plenty of non-engine space. Like this deck opts to run Fulos and Ash Blossom plus Book of Eclipse, and this was a top 4 list from the Greek Open. I feel like you can also adjust your list to do other things. You can run the K9 variant. I know that the K9 variant just got like first place at regional too. You know, that variant probably turbos out Paradise Smashers, because this deck can put up 3 level 5s quite easily just within the engine. So it's one of those things that you could always consider in this kind of build too. And you know, it's just very solid if you want to learn a deck that has that respects a player that can learn the combo lines very well, because it's a very hard deck to play under stress. And if you need to know like the lines through the hand traps and such and so forth. And this deck clocks in at about $133, so not bad, not bad. All right, next we have Blue Eyes at number 4, guys. This is a deck that still, you can just buy 3 structure decks and put a few staples in, and for around 50, you know, to $100 if you end up getting your Dominus Purges, which is the ideal hand trap for this deck. You can also top 4 possibly a regional like this guy did in the Albuquerque regional a few months ago. Now, of course, Blue Eyes is a bit weaker now into the metagame, but you guys have still seen it perform very well. My friend Prophecy Wiz just went back-to-back regional top 8s with this deck, and then also there was 2 very good tops over in the NAWCQ. Shout out to Chase, one of our guests who's been on the channel before. You know, proving that this deck can do very well under any condition. So this deck still hasn't been hit on the ban list. You have full power Primite if you can get your hands on the engine. However, this build said, fuck it, we're not even going to run Primite. We're going to be running as much non-engine as we can. This deck has about 17 non-engine slots, which is very, very impressive, and this build chose to max the consistency out with the Bingo Go machine without the Primite cards. And you still have the core game plan of going into the Spirit Dragon into multiple Omni Negates with a pretty clear OTK line with Tyrant Dragon plus a few big bodies. So yeah, guys, what do you guys think about Blue Eyes? And I really feel like this should be no surprise why this deck is still in the top 5 budget decks of Yu-Gi-Oh. So next we have Crystron, which is the consistent killer of my budget list lately. The last, I think, 3 or 4 lists have all had Crystron on it because the deck clocks in under $150 very easily and can get consistent regional tops, this one being about 2 weeks ago. Top 4, and this one is choosing to run the Terratop package, which is very cheap, on top of just a bunch of hand traps with, you know, Forbidden Droplet, which is great into the new format to, you know, hit Yummy, or even some of the other decks like Draco Tal, which puts up like Winda, or which you need to get rid of. Crystron is a water machine deck that pumps out bodies like it's nobody's business, and then also is able to make really, really good onboard even without the K9 stuff, because you're able to, you know, set up interruptions in the form of FA Dong Dragster on top of a Cyber Dragon Infinity, and then, you know, you still have access to generic things like Typhon and SP Little Knight, which just helps this deck's grind game. And it's still a force to be reckoned with, and if you end up getting the K9 engine, then you could always tech it in so that you would be able to play, because obviously there's rank 5 synergy with having just the K9 cards, but, you know, as you guys see, for under $150, you guys can still do very well with a Crystron deck. And then for number 2, we have Ogdoadic Mitsurugi. Now, this one could very easily have been 3rd, I feel like, but I wanted to make a bit of a gamble with this deck because this is a pretty recently topping list from about 2 weeks ago. I think a lot of people just forgot that Ogdoadic Mitsurugi is still a very broken variant, and with the Mitsurugi cards becoming cheaper and cheaper by the day, with rituals being $10 at the moment, I think this variant is actually a very cool one to consider in your rotation. This build also having Plague Spreader Zombie in it, which is absolutely wild. I think it's just presumably a good send, but at the same time, this is just, you know, running the standard Ogdoadic package in the form of Nayuya, Curse, and Nunu to provide really broken plays into the Nephthybis, which is just an incredible monster that if your opponent can't get rid of, just generates so much advantage that you just steamroll. Of course, Snake Rain being one of the best one-card starters in the whole game in this kind of deck is very good, is very insane, frankly. This build having, you know, access to also huge link package between the Abao and then just the other reptile links, and then you could also run the Ragnarika stuff. There's so much deck building behind it too, so this isn't just like a standard build. You can also just tech it out. It has a lot of gas, so theoretically going second, because the Mitsurugi cards, it's very good, right? So, and you could even, if you get the Ryzeal cards, you can maybe tech them in here depending on the ban list, of course. So yeah, guys, definitely a very good option into the metagame you want something unique and powerful. And for number 1, we have Maliss. Now, this one might not look great in hindsight, given the ban list, and whenever it drops, like, we're likely going to see a Maliss hit, but until then, I think Maliss is still one of the better budget options, frankly, and this list was a list that we featured last video, at Kissimmee Regional, but like with Maliss's recent success winning the NAWCQ and people still just running it, or almost running the NAWCQ and just doing very well across the other tier 1 events this season, I think that's still just such a good contender that you cannot ignore. Like, the onboard is just like better than basically every deck on this list for the most part, and then you are able to like go into just some of the best link plays in the form of Access Code Talk or Still Firewall. And, you know, with the Agnister card, the new Agnister cards becoming actually so much cheaper than they were, I think that, you know, including the Maliss names all being pennies on the dollar at this point, besides March Hare, I think that, you know, without having to spend money on Dominus Impulse, this ends up being a build under $150 that you can slap in, you know, Fuwalos, Ash, Imperm, and still have just like, you aren't compromising anything in a build like this, like outside of the Dominus Impulse, and that's something you could always work up to through locals grinding, taking this list, getting credit at your locals, and then using that credit to, you know, get cards to trade for a Dominus Impulse, or if your local store just has Dominus Impulses. So that's just kind of like the fun grind of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that, you know, nothing gets better than a 1-card Dormouse into ending on a Cryptor plus Firewall you know, with like a March Hare in hand plus White Binder in rotation, just so much interruption, right? And this deck can also choose to go into the Terahertz and then the Adignister Allied Code Talker to layer that in board even further. And its biggest silver bullet, of course, is Artifact Lancia, but I think that this deck actually gets a little bit better in this pocket format before the ban list because people are not going to be siding Lancia as often. I mean, I think the smart people probably still will, because at the regional level, I think that there's going to be a lot of Maliss still, because it's just so consistent. People don't want to buy new decks, so you probably have to be considerate of it in that context. But besides that, I think that a lot of times you guys will get away with murder with a lot of people not siding Artifact Lancia anymore. So yeah, guys, what do you think of this video? What was your favorite deck on this list? And let me know down below, and we'll be seeing you guys later. Have a great day. Love you guys. Bye.